Okay, we are now going to look at arbitration. Now, arbitration comes from the Arbitration Act 1996. This is where the parties decide to let an independent, neutral, qualified, trained person make the decision and settle the dispute for them. So this person is called an arbitrator. They are an expert. They are specially qualified in what they do. And it can be 1 to 3 arbitrators who listen to your dispute. Quite often it can be an oral agreement to go to arbitration, but equally it can be made in writing. What you will find is a lot of contracts have what's called a Scott versus Avery clause. So, for example, mobile phone contracts, package holiday contracts will have this in their terms and conditions. And what a Scott versus Avery clause does is it says, in the event of a dispute, the matter will be resolved through arbitration. So a mobile phone contract would say, in a dispute against you versus O2, it would go to arbitration. So the parties do remain in control for part of this because they choose who the arbitrator is, where and when the meeting will take place. If they can't agree who the arbitrator is, the court can appoint an arbitrator. Now, the arbitrator's decision is binding, so it's a final, legally binding decision. It's very difficult to appeal. You can only appeal if it's been like a point of legal, serious legal irregularity. Okay, so that's the basis of what arbitration is. Now, thinking about advantages, one of the advantages is it's quicker than a full trial in court. So it reduces the stress of court. It's less formal. There are no barristers with wigs or judges, so it's less intimidating. A second advantage is the arbitrator is qualified. They are an expert. They know what they are doing. So the decision is likely to be correct legally, and therefore justice is going to be achieved. And it is a binding decision. You reach a decision, which you don't in the other 3 types of ADR. And then another advantage to think about is the procedure does have some flexibility. The parties remain partially in control because there's a flexible timetable. The parties can choose the arbitrator, so there's an element of them being in control. However, what happens if a legal point arises that the arbitrator cannot deal with? It may have to then involve lawyers, so that adds to the cost, that adds to the delay. So yes, the arbitrator is a trained arbitrator, but they're not necessarily fully legally trained, so you might still have to use lawyers. The fact that the decision is final and binding, we said was a good thing, but you could argue is also a bad thing. It limits the flexibility of an alternative to court. It's legally binding and it's very difficult to appeal. You need certain conditions in order to appeal. And again, like the civil courts, there are still delays because particularly in complex cases, it's going to take a while. A final disadvantage to think about is it's more expensive than the other types of ADR. So the parties may not be on an equal footing. You versus O2 or you versus TUI, a big holiday company, through arbitration, they are going to be able to afford more experienced lawyers. It's very difficult for you to get legal aid. So there's going to be what we call inequality of arms, which is inequality between the 2 parties seeking arbitration. So that's not an exhaustive list. There are other advantages and disadvantages, but hopefully that helps a bit.